I'll do some proper introductions in a second, but let's go back in time slightly, only a few weeks, to the 6th of January, where in Leicester, at 6 a.m, a new breakfast show was launching. It was presented by Jimmy and Samaya, the new faces of BBC Radio Leicester Breakfast, a new breed of BBC local radio presentation. And this is just one snapshot of the show.
That's all for now. I'll be back at 7.
Cheers, Joe.
The sound of Leicester.
Jimmy and Samaya at breakfast.
BBC Radio Leicester.
Younger voices, younger production, new music for BBC local radio. And in this session today, we're going to explore how this all came together. I was meant to be joined today by a name that you've already seen on the screen in the main room, Gareth Roberts from the BBC, who's the local radio development editor for BBC Local Radio. Now, unfortunately, he is in Ireland. He's down near Cork and caught a sickness bug, and so was unable to travel up today. So this presentation is hopefully really good, but it's a slightly different presentation than I was expecting to give today on my own. But we will be hearing from Gareth throughout the presentation through video form. My name's Paul. I am the sales manager for ReelWorld. ReelWorld have been going for 25 years, creating jingle and audio branding for radio stations across the globe, currently with offices in Seattle and here at Media City. And so this is our base, just outside of Manchester in Media City. This left tower you see above the word studios, up on the 17th floor is where our office is based. And that's where our team of producers and people in my team and the sales team respond to client briefs, come up with new creative solutions and work on new ideas. And beyond that, we really pride ourselves in spending time to understand where the industry is going, following the trends, following the latest radio news, and trying to understand where the industry is heading so we can support the industry into this future. I think it was quite interesting seeing some of the stuff that was discussed in the Future of Radio session earlier. And actually one of the things that wasn't really touched on was the sound, the audio, what was coming out of the speakers, which is going to be so important to appeal to listeners. So because we're based in the UK, do spend quite a lot of time listening to BBC radio stations. We've done some work with Radio 1, creating the sound of Greg James at breakfast, with Radio Scotland, creating an orchestral package for them, and other brands as well all over the world. But the BBC in particular, because this building on the left is one of the main BBC buildings where 5 Live and Radio Manchester come from. And so we've been paying a lot of attention to BBC local radio in recent years and seen a real change in the on-air sound. New music, a younger direction, younger faces. And so we were kind of expecting a brief at some point for a new sound. We thought that might come. And when it did in summer last year, we'd already had some thoughts about where we could take it. I thought it would be a good starting point just to give you a sense of where BBC local radio is up until now. So it's a network of 39 local radio stations in regions and cities across the UK, from Newcastle and Cumbria in the north down to Somerset and Kent in the south. Each with their own personality, covering local issues, but all part of that big BBC machine. And with that identity, I think for a long time, what the BBC has tried to do with their audio branding is kind of keep it quite safe. And they've tried to make it work on every part of the network. And so here's just a sense of the current sound, which is orchestral, it's quite grown up, and it's quite serious.
The way, some half-term tips. Maybe one day into the half-term holidays, you're thinking, I could do with some ideas. Well, we can sort you out, and maybe, just maybe, even if you weren't, we might inspire you to get out and about in West Yorkshire. Also, as well, one of our professionals is joining us in half an hour. Karen Forshaw, West Yorkshire GP. Got a question for her? You can text, telephone, or email it in right now.
on DAB digital radio, 92.4 FM and online. Your station for Yorkshire.
BBC Radio Leeds. BBC News at 7 o'clock. Good morning, I'm Sarah Wakefield. The BBC investigation has found that young people in Leeds...
So very functional, puts a brand sheen on the station, but isn't very fun. It doesn't make you feel anything, it just is there to surround the station. So here's Gareth, he is somewhere outside trying not to be sick. And I asked him to let us know why was now the right time to update the sound of local radio.
Hello and welcome to a very windy Kinsale. I'm sorry I'm not there with you today, but I hope you're having a good time. So I want to talk to you about why we felt it was time for a change in local radio to the sounds of our stations. And there's several reasons. Firstly, we've been with the existing supplier for about a decade. It had served us really well, but it was a different time. It was a time when local radio was very firmly part of the news family. And our function was really about news and information and breaking stories and original journalism. Now, for local radio, that's still really important and the backbone of what we do, but increasingly we're moving towards the personality, the companionship side, owning the local conversation, the passion and pride, and also we just wanted a bit more feel-good, frankly. So it was time to change and something to really work with that change of direction towards personality. Next reason was really because our music was changing. Over the last few years, we've done a lot of research on the music that we play, and increasingly we're aware that a lot of our audience, our core audience, are really happy with a newer, fresher selection of songs, and we've moved towards that, and maybe our imaging hadn't, so we needed to change that. And finally, and this was the big one, we needed something that would make people listen again, that would really feel fresh and truly different. We had to push it beyond just a bit of a tweak, so that people who maybe thought local radio wasn't for them, in fact we spoke to quite a few people in their 50s and 60s who rather worryingly thought we were for their parents. By making a significant change, of course a jingle isn't going to change everything, but giving our stations a fresh new sound, it might help new listeners or returning listeners reappraise us.
We'll see a lot of Gareth trying to stop the video because they arrived quite late and I didn't have time to edit those, I'm afraid. So, as Gareth explains, it was time for a change, and he worked with the BBC local radio editors to come together to create an idea of where they were heading. And the pitch document that came through, I think, was 5 or 6 pages. It was filled with information about the music strategy, the presentation strategy. And actually, we love that. That level of detail is what gives us some real clarity over what to do and what ideas to come up with. I've pulled out a few of those key quotes. This one's particularly important, and I know it's particularly important because it appeared at the bottom of every single page of the document in the footer. And if there's one way of trying to make sure something looks important, it's doing that. So this was to be memorable, bold, different, big, fresh, younger, and evoke an emotional connection. And what was interesting about that quote was actually that evolved into being almost our checklist. So as we listened through the jingles as we created them, we were ticking off those points to make sure that that's what we were trying to achieve. And what I read from this was a want for revolution. It wasn't a call for evolution. They weren't looking for a step forward. They were looking for a fundamental change in the direction of their sound. Now, I will caution that because I've been at ReelWorld for 6 years now, and I've seen and heard the word revolution a lot from radio stations when they go to pitch. And usually they want 5%, not 50% change. But with this one, we went and saw Gareth. We spent time with him for 3 hours discussing the document. And I left that meeting going, we should come up with something that really changes the sound. The document also called for, people may hold outdated perceptions of BBC local radio. It's crucial that this package helps new and lapsed listeners reappraise BBC local radio as for me. Now, this one was important because in the UK, we've seen a lot of change in the last 2 years, where stations have shifted from maybe having a local breakfast show to a central breakfast show from London. They might have lost the same at Drive. A lot of brands have changed what localness means. So in the past, there might have been 5 transmitters that made up one region. That's now switched to one regional station. And what the feeling was that BBC Local Radio might be the place that you need to land for those listeners. So we had some really bad flooding in the UK. It continues over the last couple of weeks. BBC Local Radio has been the one place where you can get local information about what's happening in your area. But the challenge for BBC Local Radio is the radio ear, what you hear when you listen to BBC Local Radio, up until this recent change, was very different to what you were used to on brands like Heart and Capital. And so actually bringing in something that allowed the BBC Local Radio stations to carry on doing what they do best, but with a familiarity to the listeners, was really important. It also said that it's essential that the package has a contemporary sound with high production values, delivering a warm, inclusive, feel-good factor to our listeners that work brilliantly with our music mix. The music mix is really varied. I'll show you some clock hours in a moment, and that really shows the breadth of music. But when I read that, having read a lot of these documents, that says sung vocals. And it's very early in the presentation when we're doing jingles to talk about sung vocals, and I'm afraid people are about to walk out. But actually, when you look at warm and feel good, sung vocals in jingles are the two things that really deliver that. And so when we started to talk about the package internally, we really delved into how we could do sung vocals in a contemporary way. And actually we've been doing that a lot on our CHR and Hot AC packages for different brands. But in terms of doing a really contemporary sound for an AC, an older formatted radio station, we had to kind of think again about how we were going to do that. But there was a warning. Being contemporary and sounding fresh is paramount. So we want to avoid sung jingles that sound cheesy, old or predictable. Now, what that does do is that gives us license to do sung jingles in some form, because they're considering it. We just have to do it in the right way. And we'll come on to that in a moment. But that was really key to what they were looking for, is that freshness, that contemporary sound. So we took all this information, we took the 3-hour meeting with Gareth in Coventry, and we started to do our own research about the network. And one of the things that we know from living in the UK and listening to BBC Local Radio is that the presenter lineups tend to be broad with a variety of experiences. So this is 4 shows from BBC Radio Manchester. So Chelsea's in the top corner. She comes from Key 103, the big commercial station around the corner. She presents the breakfast show. The 2 guys in the top right present the football phone-in. It's called Talking Balls, every weekday afternoon at 6. Jimmy and Eamon have been doing Sunday mornings since I was a child, and it includes a mini drama with a cartoon character style voice. And Mike Sweeney I used to produce. Mike's a former boxer from Salford. He was in a band called the Salford Jets during the punk era. And when I first met him as a 25-year-old gay man, I thought he was going to kill me. But he has a heart of gold. But he presents the mid-morning phone-in with loads of warmth. But a variety of voices. But people like Chelsea, people like the guys presenting Talking Balls, are this new breed of younger presenters. So how do you bring a package that appeals to everyone? And what we kind of went for is actually, if we can make sure it's warm, we can make sure it's feel good, that should match up all the presentation. It's not about the age of the voiceover, it's about the feel when you hear it. And then we started to look at the music. So this was one of the music rundowns that they included in the pitch documents. So we went, well, they must be proud of that. And so this just shows the variety of music in just 1 hour. Starting with Texas, there's a bit of Take That in there, but not best Take That in the world. Jess Glynne's in there. The new playlist artist on there is Jack Savaretti and Mika. So there's a real variety of music there, music styles, instrumentation. There's another example here. But actually, tonally, there is a general upbeat positivity to a lot of the music. Let's just avoid Danny Wilson at the top there. But, Jennifer Lopez, Love Don't Cost a Thing. Blossoms, very cool, very trendy for BBC Local Radio. And then Cher. So a whole variety of music. And really thinking about how you can pull that all together. But then actually having conversations internally and with the BBC, the feeling was actually, let's not try and create jingles that work with all this stuff. They want to image younger, they want to image fresher. So let's pay attention to the recurrence, let's pay attention to the playlist songs and make a jingle package that matches that, and then the other stuff works around it. Let's just take a quick look at how we view the UK radio market. So this was 8 months ago. And what we do when we're looking at big projects like this is we will track the marketplace. So we will look at the tools and techniques that stations are using, from lighter touch production at the bottom to hotter techniques at the top. And then we'll look at a variety of formats, so AC and speech on the far left, CHR on the far right. And when we were tracking this, at this point last summer, BBC Local Radio was the most grown up, with the lightest touch production that didn't really do anything. It was all very functional, and Smooth and Magic follow that. Radio 2 is the only anomaly here where actually they're playing more contemporary music than ever before, but actually their sound is still quite traditional. It's still those big jingles. But they're Radio 2 and they're like strictly on the radio, so they get to be a bit rule breaking. But really you expect all stations to fit on that diagonal line. And so when BBC Local Radio started to update their music policy, it kind of moved them past Smooth and Magic and kind of closer to the hotter stations, but their imaging was still really soft. So what we wanted to do, someone's just raised the phone, so I don't want to, is move them up to there. And this is important as well, because actually what we're always looking for is the space. You know, what we don't want to do is put someone's sound on top of the competitors to cause confusion. So we need to make sure that where we're moving people to, it's actually a place where people can own that sound and it can be unique to them in the markets. So I will come on into some of the details of what the building blocks are, but I think it's probably about time to hear some audio. For a jingle session, I've talked a lot. And this first bit of audio is our first submission to the BBC, which I'm not sure we've played to anyone other than those people in that first room. So this is a bit of a Radio Days Island exclusive, but a very low-key one. This is the original demo. In this, they ask us to create our own strapline. And at that point, the idea was that a single strapline would work on all stations, which as someone who was about to make a package, ReelWorld were quite excited by. And then we were also going to use a voiceover for the station name. So this was the original strapline using the soundtrack to your life as the positioner.
ReelWorld presents the new sound of BBC Local Radio. The soundtrack, the soundtrack, the soundtrack, the soundtrack to your life. BBC Radio Leeds.
I'm waiting on my love, my love, my love. Won't you stay away?
The soundtrack.
The soundtrack to your life.
The soundtrack to your life. BBC Essex.
Oh, take love.
The soundtrack to your life. BBC Hereford and Worcester. On your radio,
On BBC Sounds.
and on your smart speaker.
Hey beep, play BBC Radio Leeds. The soundtrack to your life is
BBC Radio Leeds.
I think this news bed plays for slightly longer than is comfortable. So we just have to pretend it's not happening. And it'll still go.
ReelWorld.
Make Great Radio.
So when we pressed send on that demo, there was two things that we knew. We'd over-delivered. They'd asked for one demo jingle and a news bed, and we delivered 3 and a news bed and various other things. And they would either love it or they would hate it. But what we were really proud of was actually it felt like it was something that was very real world and comes from the work that we've done for many years across radio stations across the globe. The tuned vocals, the a cappella sings that just kind of fall onto the jingle so they don't feel contrived, the conversational voiceover treatments, and some really feel-good, high-quality music. So let me just talk you through some of the elements, and then we can hear from Gareth what he thinks of the sound. So we view this as three key elements that make up the sound. The logo was really important. We knew that we had to create a logo that would work across all 39 radio stations. Online, there's been a lot of discussion about what the 6 notes that we ended up with actually mean. You know, is it BBC radio? Unfortunately, the first 3 notes don't mean anything, but the last 3 notes mean BBC. We could have easily gone for a 3-note sonic logo, but what we felt was really important was something that was a bit more melodic, because the more melodic the logo is, it gets more stuck in your head. So that's why we ended up on this 6-note logo. It sounds like this, or not. Six notes that work on every single radio station. And what we ended up including was BBC voiceover, but tuned over those last 3 notes. So it's kind of using the techniques that singers would use, but using voiceover instead. We then wanted a standout vocal treatment. We wanted to make sure that we had singers that sounded fresh and young and relevant to the younger audiences they're hoping to bring in. About an hour ago in Manchester in our studios, we've just finished a 3-day vocal session with Kirsten and Marcus, where we've just sang 31 BBC local radio stations over 3 days, which was ReelWorld's biggest ever jingle recording project. When we started the project, the BBC were asking for 3 stations to be sung. By the end of it, as more and more stations heard the sung vocals, 38 of the 39 stations wanted the sings. So we've spent the last 3 days recording a whole chunk of them. Kirsten's on the left. She is the touring vocalist with Clean Bandit. So whenever they go on tour, they can't take Jess Glynn and Anne-Marie and all their featured artists with them. So she goes on the road with them. And Marcus is actually from Stockholm, but don't tell the BBC that. But he's our male vocalist, and we chose him because of logistics. We know he's really focused. He's got an ability to really nail a large vocal session. And this wasn't a project where we could gamble on someone who was not there to really focus. Like 3 days recording 31 different radio stations, you need a certain level of commitment. And then we also spent quite a lot of time thinking about voiceovers. In the document for the first time, it said that the BBC was looking for a single voiceover to use across the network, but that hunt was going on internally. So we chose 2 voices. Anna Foster's on the left. She presents 5 Live Drive on BBC Radio 5 Live. And Alex James is on the right. He's my best friend. And he presents for Bauer in the UK. And we thought we were picking 2 voices that would sound really good on the demos. And then we'd be really disappointed because they would disappear because the stations would bring in a more traditional voiceover. We chose presenters because we wanted more conversational styles. We wanted a more relaxed treatments. Anna also is in the BBC all the time, so it's really accessible for them to use. They like the voiceovers so much that they're now both on contracts to be network voices across the whole network. And just a note, because this will change now from what you've heard before, as we've now gone into the full package, they've updated their strap lines. And what they've wanted is a local line and a music line to define the 2 areas they're most proud of. So each station is the sound of, and then a place name, the sound of Merseyside, and all the music you love. And that's a music strap line that helps them sell their new music strategy. That's important because it will affect what we play in a second. So here's Gareth again. He stood outside about to vomit, and I asked him to let us know what he thought of the ReelWorld. Different question. I asked him what he was expecting to hear from the submissions. Come on.
So what did we think the end package was going to sound like? Well, we didn't have loads of preconceptions, but there were the obvious things. We needed it to be instantly recognisable. We wanted a sense of brand identity, which we could use across the network of 39 stations, and yet was versatile enough to allow us to deal with each of those stations' differences, very different programming, very different areas that they serve across the BBC Local Radio 39 stations. We also knew that we wanted more musicality in our package. We talked more about the importance of music to our stations, and we encouraged the companies who pitched for this to really think about how can you bring in sings and more musicality without it being cheesy. And I know different people feel very differently about sings, but we encourage people to pitch and be brave. And we said, you know, don't feel like you just have to sing the radio station name. In the end, we've ended up singing a lot of radio station names. But there was a lot of creativity along the way. One of the things we wanted to do was also, if you like, consolidate these strap lines across our 39 stations. We knew all our stations have one thing in common, which is they are a sense of place. They are the sound of where they live. And a few of our stations have used the voice of where they live, and a few of our stations have used the sound, and several other stations are using all sorts of lines. And we came down on saying, well, let's decide whether we use the sound of or the voice of, and we've obviously ended up with the sound of. And the final thing is the package gives us that flexibility we need, because there's a sung music line in there, which is the first time we've ever imaged or if you like, given ourselves a positioning statement for the music. So all the music you love. But the genius of what ReelWorld have done is that line, all the music you love, we use as what we call a B line. So we can leave it in for our music programming, but we can take it out as a sung line and replace it with a dry VO. So it works perfectly well for our breakfast or sports programs, when the line will become the sound of Coventry and such at breakfast, or the sound of Coventry and proud to follow the Sky Blues. So it's an incredibly versatile package.
We'll hear from Gareth once more before the end of the session. But let's just hear some jingles. So you've heard the demo, you've heard a bit of a taster for the sound of Leicester, but this is Leicester again, and this is how the package launched back at the start of January on BBC Radio Leicester.
Introducing the new sound of BBC Local Radio.
The sound of Leicester.
And all the music you love.
BBC Radio Leicester.
I'm waiting on my love, my love, my love. Won't you stay away? The sound.
The sound of Leicester. And all the music you love. BBC Radio Leicester.
Oh, take it love.
The sound of Leicester.
The sound of Leicester.
And all the music you love. BBC Radio Leicester. If you think you're getting away, I will prove you wrong. I'll take you all the way. Say another song.
The sound.
The sound.
The sound of Leicester.
And all the music you love. BBC Radio Leicester. Just the way you are. Yeah. The sound of Leicester. And all the music you love. The music you love. BBC Radio Leicester.
Darling, you and I take over the world. One step at a time, just you and I. The sound of Leicester.
Of Leicester. And all the music you love. BBC Radio Leicester. All I wanna do is have a little fun before I die. All I wanna do.
From the BBC Sounds app, on your smart speaker,
Play BBC Radio Leicester.
and on your radio.
The sound of Leicester is
BBC Radio Leicester.
So 6 themes in the initial package. The first 3 jingles you heard there were actually the first 3 themes from the demo, and they all evolved into the final sound. So 1 down, 38 to go. One question we get asked a lot about is localisation. So how do you make it feel local? And actually, I think increasingly, you don't need to do tokenist localism, but in some markets where like Newcastle or Liverpool, where people have very distinct local accents, we are adding in local voiceover alongside the 2 network voiceovers. And on every package, you'll hear that smart speaker line, and we're getting local voices to do that line, saying play BBC Radio Leicester. And even that in itself is a mood change for BBC Local Radio, just to be talking about smart speakers and ways to listen. Previously they would have had a 1-minute news build. Now it's all self-contained. It means the presenters can't talk for as long. It adds pace and it adds energy. This is what my heads look like for the last 3 months. This is just a little bit of a snapshot of some of the detail that's gone into this rollout. The BBC has been working with a hub of producers, so when we deliver the jingle package to them, they then put this in a hub of 8 producers, and they'll work in tandem to deliver the jingles to the stations at the same time. There's a few secrets on there as to when next stations are launching as well, for anyone who's very eagle-eyed. But they've really put a lot of time into upskilling their producers as well. So previously there would be producers based across local sites that didn't really work together to increase best practice. So they brought this team together. They've also shifted most of them onto Pro Tools and new computers to make it possible for them to work at the highest level. When I say most of them, the ones that weren't moved over were already on Pro Tools, but the majority of them were using Adobe rather than Pro Tools. And they put a lot of time into training the producers to have the toolkit to be able to work from. And they've gone around local stations to give presenters training on how to use the package. This guy's Phil Upton. He will present from Monday the new breakfast show on BBC CWR. When we started this process, that was called BBC Radio Coventry, but it's one of the few stations that's changed its name over the journey. And they've had Phil record an audio guide that's gone out to each station to help them hear some of the best ways to use the sound. Here's just a quick taster of that.
So you've heard the shotguns. These are best placed straight after the news sequences into your first song, as they contain the strapline, all the music you love. So there's no better way to demonstrate that than by going straight into a song.
And all the music you love. BBC Radio so loud.
We've also got hyper IDs.
BBC CWR.
These are very short jingles.
BBC Radio Lincolnshire. If you don't wanna see me.
You can use these as part of segues or to get out of utilities and stop sets such as travel junctions if you don't end them already with a trail.
And I think just that level of care, I think the network for a long time lived in the news department. And so by spending the time to make sure that the presenters had the skills to know how to use the imaging, it works most of the time, it allows the quality of sound to be improved. So back to Gareth, and let's find out from him some final thoughts.
I've had to move, the sun's come out. So what do I think of the package that ReelWorld has created, and what does it mean for local radio? Well, as I say, a new imaging package isn't going to solve all your problems, but it is part of an overall package, if you like, along with new music and a move towards owning the local conversation, the passion, the pride, to give our stations a really invigorated and refreshed sound. So I think it does that. I think the other thing that it really does, because it's very much made in a sort of traditional imaging sense, and there's a lot of discipline about how the cuts are made and how they're delivered, and we've rolled out Station Sound Guide, which I know you'll hear some of. We've really returned to the craft of using imaging around music and around personality presenters, so that the imaging is really respected and presenters and producers are really thinking about how they use imaging alongside the music they play, maybe in a way that we hadn't done before. We'd emphasised certain bits of making radio, but we've fallen back a bit on just the basics of great craft and putting things together and making them really sing, and this thing of forward momentum. You know, nothing goes on too long with this package, and you know, for a radio station and a network of radio stations that needs to convince new listeners to come back and keep coming back, that's really important.
Gareth sent me a text after that one which said, right, I'm going back to bed now. So 8 stations delivered from us. We've just recorded the rest in Manchester. I think the singers have gone for a long lie down. And I just thought I'd end with just a flavour of how this all comes together across a network. So we've heard a lot of Leicester, we've heard how that sounds. But how does that roll out now sound in different areas of the UK? There's 2 stations in here that haven't launched yet. So Lincolnshire and CWR. Lincolnshire launches on Saturday and CWR launches on Monday. So you're hearing those before the listeners, but the others are on air.
The sound.
The sound of Leicester.
And all the music you love.
BBC Radio Leicester.
The sound.
The sound of Cov. And all the music you love. BBC CWR. The sound of love. The sound of Manchester. And all the music you love. BBC Radio Manchester.
The sound.
The sound.
The sound of Nottinghamshire.
And all the music you love. BBC Radio Nottingham. The sound
of where we live.
and all the music you love. The music you love. BBC Radio Tees. The sound of
The sound of the sound.
the sounds and all the music you love. BBC Radio Solent.
From the BBC Sounds app, on your smart speaker
Play BBC Radio Lincolnshire.
and on your radio.
The sound of Lincolnshire is
BBC Radio Lincolnshire.
And that is the new sound of BBC Local Radio. I've been following a clock over here that says it's now 5 o'clock, but I believe it's now after 5 o'clock, which is not very accurate. But no one's come to the door to say we need to wrap up. So does anyone have any questions?
Just sort of one, I think you said did 38 of the 39 stations take the song?
Yes.
Is there a reason one of them didn't?
So the one station that isn't going to take a song is BBC Radio London, and they're much more speech focused. It's almost kind of much more traditional, grown up. It's like Radio 4 meets Radio 5 Live almost. So tonally it doesn't quite fit for them. Though we have recorded it just in case a phone call comes in a couple of months' time and asks for an update.
Did
So
you just give them a sonic logo instead?
so they've got voiceover instead in that position. So got a voiceover treatment there. Anything else? Lovely. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I'll let you go on to the next session.